Decisional helps any business build automation agents for automating business workflows. Typically, this used to be a very complex process of either using a no-code tool, dragging blocks around in a workflow canvas, and Decisional simplifies that process because you talk to an agent that builds its own workflow and tests and maintains it. Really is a tool for empowering businesses on the smaller side to really use AI and with the existing tools that they're using. Typically takes less than 10 minutes to build a more than 10-step workflow, which is I think at least 5 to 10 times lesser time than it would take on like no-code software.
I sat down with Dhruv Tandon, CEO and co-founder of Decisional AI, a company that's using natural language to build AI agents, automating business-critical workflows. No drag and drop needed. Let's dive in. Dhruv, thank you so much for coming to this show.
Thanks, Ali.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. Can you tell me what you're building and what is that big problem that you're trying to solve?
Sure. So my name is Dhruv. I'm one of the co-founders of Decisional, and Decisional helps any business build automation agents for automating business workflows. And so typically this used to be a very complex process of either using a no-code tool, dragging blocks around in a workflow canvas, and Decisional simplifies that process because you talk to an agent that builds its own workflow and tests and maintains it. So you don't need to get into managing and maintaining your business process or automation.
Nice. That's very nice. So you basically use natural language to build automations versus maybe some of the traditional tools. And some of the tools that come to my mind would be like N10, Zapier,
Yeah.
and Make.com. You have that drag and drop.
One of the important distinctions between N10, Zapier, and Make is that you would have like a human operator that would create the structure of the workflow diagram, and you'd also depend on this person to maintain it and make edits to it. Whereas we really have a completely like natural language based. Yeah, I think it crashed as soon as I pressed share.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
okay. That's odd. I mean, it dropped.
Um,
You can try
you
again.
want me? Okay, great. I'm going to zoom in a bit. And so the way that you would build an automation on Decisional is that you would just come in and enter a prompt in natural language. It will connect to all the tools that you probably are already using, and you just hit submit, and your agent is essentially going to help you build this automation. And it has its own dedicated computer. It can write its own code, and so it's really flexible in the way it can solve your problems. And the goal is really to work with this agent in natural language and come up with the best approach for building this automation. And so it's got access to tools. It can it can generate Excel sheets. It can read documents. It can use APIs. And so it has the ability of like a coding agent, except that it's in a form factor where someone doesn't necessarily need to know how to code or how exactly the code works in order to be able to use these tools.
Interesting. Do you still need to make those integrations like manually, or does the agent does all of those integrations on its own once you give the instructions?
That's a good question. So if the integration is available in our library of integrations, and we have around 1,000 of them, then all you need to do is really click on a button, and it will just take you to the page where you can click on accept, and it will link the integration, and that's all you need to do. If it's a slightly more complicated, let's say the integration doesn't exist on our platform, you can always get the API key and like put it in our platform, and it'll still be able to read the docs and help you build that integration. So the native integrations are easier to connect, but it can really connect with anything that has an API.
Got it. Nice.
So here it's like really trying to help me think through the automation. So in this case, like asked it to build an agent that tracks leads in a Google Sheet and sends a personalized introduction email when a new lead is added to HubSpot. And so it's asking me a bunch of questions that I should have probably specified in the prompt. But because you can work with the AI, answer questions that it has, I'm going to say it should be AI written. In case there's no email address, I'm going to say, just flag it in the sheet. These are the kind of things that it works with you on.
Yeah.
And it finally will work towards creating a plan, which is going to be essentially like a job description of your agent. And so typically, like, you would spend time writing the role of your agent or writing the role of like, potentially someone who's going to help you with this task. But now, that can be just an AI agent and it'll help you like think through it. So it's asking me who should the email be from. I can say from Dhruv. And it's essentially able to use the APIs in real time, and so it's going to be able to read data from these systems and help me think through these integrations. Which if you had to do it all in one go, you'd probably like build the entire workflow and then run it, and then you realize something goes wrong, right? Yeah. So it is. So in the first stage, you have like a plan which essentially tells you like what the agent is going to do, and it's like completely in natural language. It's like a resume for the agent, right? Of what its role is, and it tells you like what tools it's going to have access to, because you really want to control the tools that you want to give to your agent. You don't want it to be having like root access to everything in your company, and so you limit the number of tools. And then finally, when what it's writing right now, it's writing a workflow so that you can visualize really what's happening. So the agent will write code, but really you need a way that you can kind of like operate at a higher level of abstraction, where you just see what's happening, at a workflow level. And so in Decisional, every node is actually just a chunk of code, and it's just there as a way for a human operator to better manage this workflow. And what that means is that you could say that I want you to do this, I want you to send this email in such a way. First, you search the web, then you figure out like, what's the company, you go to the company website, look at the customers that they have, and then craft something, right? And so your human taste is really, involved in crafting the workflow. So then after it's done, like generating the workflow code, you click on it and you get something like this, right?
Very nice.
And so it's like the way it planned it, it says like, I'm going to fetch the contact, I'm going to set up a sheet, I'm going to start appending leads, then I'm going to check the email, then I'll compose an email, send an email, and then, log it as sent. And I could be like, in any of these steps say that, hey, I think you should work like this, or like, give feedback, because I'm really the owner of this process. And I care about the way the work is done, and I want control over how it happens. And so you could just talk to the agent and it would like modify it. And so do you think that you have any request here? I can actually try to like make a change on the fly. So if you were doing this process of like, reaching out to people, like how would you, personalize the email?
Yeah, I think when it comes to personalization, it's a must-have these days. And even if it's like small thing, hey, I came across your company and what you're building is pretty interesting, and then kind of get personalization on that front.
Yeah.
Even that would be interesting.
Makes sense. So let's add something here. So I'm going to be like, let's use Firecrawl to search the web about, something that this person may have talked about recently, and incorporate that in the personalized email. So I just like entered a natural language prompt, gave the feedback to the agent, and it's going to change the workflow based on just the input instruction.
That's
and
pretty
so
sweet.
It's basically using the fact that I know my job better than the AI, so I can really control it and tell it that, hey, you're going to use some lousy web search, you might as well use Firecrawl, because I know I've played around with it a lot, I know it works. So That's kind of like what we're trying to do, like really take the human input into the way the agent works.
Got it. By the way, your voice input, is that built-in feature of Decisional, or is that a separate tool that you're using?
No, that's a separate tool I'm using. It
Okay.
just speeds up the demos
Yes,
because
yes.
I talk. I talk a lot faster than I type.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I'm a big fan of those tools. I use one of
yeah,
the tools as well, Whisper. But I was kind
yeah,
of
yeah. I'm
wondering.
using Whisper too. Yeah,
Okay,
Whisper
awesome.
is
All right.
cool. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, but I was just wondering if you've kind of were able to build into the
Well,
product.
I recommend people to use one of the tools, either Whisper or Willow Voice.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think eventually they'll probably all give APIs where you can just like integrate it in your product.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think, for us, like it's great that there are tools out there. We don't want to build them,
yeah.
but we definitely think that people should use them. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And so what's happening now is like the agent is actually editing the workflow, trying to incorporate, the feedback that I gave
Hmm.
and, put it back in the workflow. And so once it's really done with that, uh, and if you like, if you want to wait, have fun while waiting, like we have like a fun mini game that you
Oh
can play
wow, you
where
take care of
you
everything.
can.
That's pretty
Yeah,
sweet.
it's like I have a high score of like 5,000 on this mini game, but the cool thing is that once the workflow is ready, like the game will automatically change. So
That's
it's just
that's that's very sweet. Very creative, actually.
yeah. So there, like it says now the workflow is ready. It's time to stop playing the game. So yeah, and so now the workflow has incorporated a research lead node, and at this point it's like ready to test. And so the way this would work is that you can run a test. Like it would be really annoying in other platforms to run a test because there's no intelligence involved in the testing because you'd have to find a record from some system, try to create some mock data. But I can just tell the agent to run a test on mock data, and it'll figure out like all of the fields that need to be populated.
That's nice. That's very handy.
Right. So basically, like it's going to run the test, and then finally, once the test is completed, you can publish this agent. And the cool thing is that once you publish the agent, you can like and if you're like me, you're using like hundreds of these agents. So there's a dashboard where you can track like all your live agents, where it's like working, where it's not. And finally, like there's just one single agent who's like a manager of all these agents that
Hmm.
you talk to, and they help you keep these agents working and alive. In case something goes wrong, it'll try to fix itself. Like let's say I ran out of Firecrawl credits,
Yeah.
and it would basically figure out that this agent is failing because of this reason, and it would reach out to me over Slack and tell me that you need to like fix this issue. And so I typically don't have to worry about maintaining and managing these agents.
Nice. Nice. Yeah.
So yeah,
So
yeah, I'm gonna like stop sharing my screen
mm,
now.
that's pretty sweet, especially the gaming feature. Going back to like things that would make your product different from the closest competition. So I feel like you're taking the best of both worlds. Like you have visual flowchart, but at the same time, you're taking advantage of natural language to
Yeah,
drive the
yeah.
process and orchestrate the process.
Yeah, so I think that there are three major differentiators. One is the control that you get.
Hmm.
So once I probably didn't go into this, but once like you run the agent, you get like a visual feedback of like where what all ran successfully and what failed. In fact, maybe I should show you one quick example. Yeah, and so you can look at every run that the agent has completed, and you can click on the specific run and get like node level details about like how that particular node was executed. You can go back and see different nodes, and if there was a failure, like really the hardest part of
Hmm.
using an AI agent is figuring out like how to fix it and how to keep it maintained. And so that's kind of what we help with. So initially, like we thought that the main power of the product is you've probably used something like Claude Code, right? And
Right.
so we were like nobody needs to drag these boxes around because the AI is going to be smart enough to like come up with an approach.
Hmm.
And we didn't really want the visual layer, but then we quickly figured out that that's a really efficient way for humans to operate at a higher level of abstraction.
Right.
And what that means is that building the writing the code and build and getting the automation to run is not a problem, but making sure it keeps running, making sure that you can make modifications, maintain that automation, that's the really hard part. And unless like what's going on with your agent, how it's going to do the work, it's really hard to like keep track of all of this,
Yeah.
especially when you have like multiple agents. You want to know what this agent is up to, and as you make it do more critical tasks, you want some element of control. Like you don't want a wrong invoice to send up to be sent to your customer with
Yeah.
like a wrong zero. So the question is like really giving control. That's one thing that we try to do, and also like but also like give more amount of like reasoning and intelligence. So that's the other aspect, and the third is like having this kind of pattern of an orchestrator that sits on top of all of these automations and helps you manage
Yeah.
it. So it's really about software that's agent native, that you can essentially delegate to an agent and it's going to keep maintaining these automations for you. Whereas in the previous world, it would be about building a software that's going to be used by someone who's going to click buttons and
Mhm.
try to navigate a UI.
Got it. That makes sense. Now, I know one of the kind of pain points from my own experience when I try to automate things, especially when it comes to like node-based drag and drop, is
Yeah,
if there's a bug, it's kind of hard to fix that bug. It takes me
yeah.
some time to try to identify, isolate, and then fix it, and then test it, retest it. How do you guys handle like bug fixes and all of that?
Yeah.
Does it have like built-in self-annealing, self-healing feature, and does
Yeah.
it get better and better every time it fixes something?
Yeah, so what essentially happens is because we split the automation into a step of nodes,
Hmm.
if a failure is detected, it will spawn the agent that built the automation to try to fix it.
Hmm.
And there are various reasons for like a bug in these sort of like automations. One is that it could be an external issue. Let's say you get your external system, like you're trying to use HubSpot. HubSpot is down for some reason, or it rate limits you. That's an external issue. Then there's like business logic issues, where
Hmm.
maybe you've asked the automation to always send a particular field, and once that field had a different value, it started rejecting it, right? And so there are different kinds of bugs. What we try to do is when something fails, we try to spawn a agent to fix it. And if like depending on the type of bug, it will either try to ask for your help or it will try to complete the job. And so there's a lot of different classes of these kind of bugs, and so it's really important to figure out before trying to like solve the issue. So we are self-healing in the sense that if it figures out there's a rate limiting error, then the resolution for that is just like trying it again after like 30
Hmm.
seconds. So that's something that it's possible to fix without your intervention. But in some cases, like you may need to get some sort of clarification from the person who built the automation, and so
Yeah.
you don't really want to try to fix everything. And so as soon as a failure happens, we try to like categorize the failure type, and if it's like one of those issues that should be resolvable, we'll try to go ahead and make sure that the process completes, or we will loop in the human operator and try to get some sort of clarification before trying to fix it.
Makes sense. Uh, let's talk about the technology a little bit more. What's under the hood of the product? How would you describe that?
There are different moving pieces. There is basically it's a two agent system, I would say. You have an agent that's like a supervisor agent that's responsible for just like helping you run these agents or run these sub agents, and also like look at their performance, look at their runs, review the data, figure out what's wrong, give you updates anywhere that you want it. Like you could be in Slack, you could just ask there, how is this agent running? You could also like come into the platform and ask a question. And so that's like the supervisor agent. And then there are like each agent has its own workflow that it's responsible for. And so that allows it to be, in a self-improving kind of loop. So we talked about like having the role of each agent described up front, and so it knows that it's responsible for this workflow. It needs to make sure that this task keeps happening, and we in order to do that, the agent is writing code to maintain its own workflow. Within that workflow, it could be using another AI agent node. But it could also just be like pure code, right? Because you don't want to be burning tokens for every situation. Like it depends how much intelligence you require for the workflow. And so, we have a sandbox that is assigned to that agent so that it can write its own code. And then we have like, security guardrails where, we tokenize credentials, and we never expose it directly to the agent. Instead, we sort of give it, a sort of a proxy that it can call, so that we have control over, whether you want to stop allowing this agent to use that credential, etc. So it's really about access control also. And then finally, you have a runtime environment, which is separate from like the code generation environment, so that you can isolate these two. And so, yeah, it's basically, we started off with, the core problem was like, we worked with these businesses, and they had like really, like their day-to-day workflows were quite messy in the sense that it has multiple steps. You need to go to different systems.
Right.
Some parts of it are an Excel sheet. So we started working from the customer problem backwards. And then we realized that, writing code is the most effective way to execute these workflows. But finally, like when you want to manage all of this, like people want a digital worker of sorts that's able to manage and orchestrate all of these workflows. And so we started with, how do you solve the problem of like getting this workflow to run in most kind of business workflows? And then we went backwards, and how do you make it easier to maintain it? How do you make it easier to manage it? How do you make it easier to kind of like just figure out what's going on? And that's how we ended up with this kind of architecture.
Are you guys targeting both B2C and B2B space? And where is like more you guys are
Yeah.
focused?
So we're more focused on the B2B space. We want to like help businesses automate workflows. I think there's a different kind of like profile of these kind of workflows. They're more specific in nature, tend to be more complex compared to like consumer workflows, where they tend to be more like a, I would say, a chatbot agent that you want to speak to that can do one-off tasks. So our product is focused more on repeatable business workflows that you need to have control over. That's the target segment, and we typically work on things like revenue operations workflows, sending quotations to customers, which may be involving some sort of technical inventory, figuring out how to like read documents and quote correctly. Then GDM workflows with enrichment, like something that I just showed you. And then, you may need to like hit multiple systems, do a waterfall enrichment, get data. And then there's like IT, procurement, things like that. So it's more focused on, business workflows, because those are more complex and repeatable. But it really is a tool for, empowering, businesses on the smaller side, like not like the Fortune 500 enterprises, but more like, empowering smaller businesses with maybe 50 to 1,000 employees to really use AI and with the existing tools that they're using.
Can you maybe walk me through a customer success story that really helped you to validate the product market fit?
Yeah, I think when we think about like customer success, it is about getting the job done end to end 100%. And so, in the initial days, we had like different patches of like point solutions that probably like helped someone solve 60% of their problem, but that they needed to do some manual work. And then we just figure out like that's not something that makes someone really happy about using a software. And so the workflows we target are all like 100% completion, that you can like completely delegate it to our software. And so we started off with like speaking with a bunch of design partners, and we didn't really we went and asked them what's the hardest thing in your business right now, and and then we took a seat back and try to understand how we could automate it. And the in many parts, like the question, it isn't about using more AI, it's about using it in the right places. And so that's how we arrived at this. And so we only we take a design partner on board, we look at their workflow, and we only feel that it's completed when all they need to do is like let it run on autopilot. And so that's how we tested our product initially with these design partners. Like one was like a very complicated quotation system, so you had to figure out you had a population of certain equipment assets, and you needed to figure out at the right time, figuring out what parts to quote, and that involved some sort of technical knowledge, reading these complicated manuals about like the parts of the system, because this was like some sort of machine equipment, and then going into an Excel sheet, writing it down, then coming up with an email template, sending it out to the customer, getting the data from the right system. And so that's how we work backwards. Like we wrote down the workflow, and then we built the product that could basically automate that workflow end to end, but without our intervention of having to do anything with the customer.
Yeah, that makes sense when you ask for a problem and then you work backwards. I think that's the way to approach it. Now, switching gears to maybe to market traction, I'm curious to hear what key metrics you pay close attention to, and if you could share some of those key metrics that would show the either user adoption or any other market
Yeah.
traction.
Yeah, so we monitor the number of times the agent has run, and we monitor the time that it takes to set up and take an agent live. These are the biggest health metrics that we track. And so far, like we're in closed, invite only kind of release, and we've basically our agents have run around 35,000 workflows so far, and it typically takes less than 10 minutes to build, a more than 10-step workflow, which is, I think at least 5 to 10 times lesser time than it would take on like no-code software. So these are the two things that, we track for, market adoption.
Yeah.
And when we think like, it's going to be a certain types of workflows start becoming more natural fit for us, we'll probably have native integrations for those, and that's when we like open up access to everyone.
Makes sense. I'm curious to ask, how did you land your first customer? Because I believe that's one of the most difficult things to do for any startup, land their first customer. So I'm curious what like specific actions you guys took to do that.
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time trying to generate educational content about. I think there's a lot of noise out there, so trying to educate customers about how these things work, mostly about how you can use agents to automate processes. Not even like not even telling them to do it on Decisional, but how can you be in just educating them about like the important trade-offs to consider. I think that's how we started, and eventually we built enough trust with a few people that they were willing to try out, us versus like 10 other folks in like a kind of a blind test. And that's how we got our first client, where we just we try to educate some people. They actually they just said, okay, let's throw this like startup in the mix and see how they perform. And we ended up doing well, because like we were listening to their requirements, and so we were tuned to what they needed, and it was just like the performance of the product, because in early days it's really hard to get anyone to trust you. But if they can try it and test it and see that it works, then that's something that's helpful in helping you close that first customer.
Makes sense. And then if I double click on that, like in order to educate those prospects, did you do like cold outreach to those prospects and then try to educate them, or did you do some sort of like a blog and content?
Yeah, it's mostly like LinkedIn content, a lot of blogs, and of late I've been starting to like create some videos. So, but I think most of the initial prospects were from social media on LinkedIn.
Now, speaking about future product features, what can users expect from Decisional? Some of the features maybe that excite you the most.
Yeah, I think having a single orchestrator agent really manage everything for you. We're like in early stages of like having that, but that's going to be really fun when you really are able to delegate an agent to manage your hundreds of workflows, and it's going to keep improving them over time, and so that your business is going to get better while you sleep. And I think because the way that we've built out Decisional, eventually we can start like reducing even token consumption for our users without any impact to their workflows, which is interesting because in most products it's like you only increase spend on tokens, but because of the way that we've built the platform, you can make a trade-off on that ROI. So I'm excited about a future where you could like eventually say that here's my budget for this, and this is the problem, and you have like a bunch of agents that are able to solve that problem for you for that specific budget, and over time it just keeps getting better. Your customers are getting the same quality of experience, but you're able to save time and save money over a long period of time, and you don't need to worry about maintaining and dealing with broken automations.
Okay, let me switch gears and take you back. Can you talk about your background and your co-founder's background, and how did you
Yeah.
guys came up with this idea and start building the company?
Yeah, so my background has been working in startups in product roles, and so I started my career at a bank, hated it, and then I switched over from the dark side, working at startups ever since. Worked at a Series A to C startup that was based out of San Francisco called Drip Capital, which was also a YC startup. Then joined this company called Razorpay, which is Stripe for India, also in a product role. That company also saw its growth from like early days to it becoming a unicorn and potentially IPOing very soon. And so had a seat on that journey. And then I spent a year working in venture capital before starting to work on this. And I think in early days, like we were all excited, at least my co-founding team and I, we were all excited about how AI is going to change knowledge work. But the models were just not good enough. And even though we were very excited about it, it was really hard to get any useful work out of the models. You could build like a little bit of knowledge research assistant, and maybe like integrate AI in a workflow in a very targeted fashion. But I think it's only in the last 6 months that things have started getting real. But my other co-founders' background, so one of them used to work in machine learning and AI research at Uber before he left and joined Decisional. And the third co-founder is one of my colleagues from Razorpay, and he's a distributed systems engineer. We worked together at Razorpay, and then he worked at this company called Arthur AI, which is an MLOps company, and then he joined us. So we had a good complementary set of skills in terms of product, AI research, and distributed systems engineer, and we've been excited about building agents in general. And we actually come from like a business family background, and so we saw our own like family businesses kind of struggling to adopt AI, whereas enterprises had a direct line with all the foundation model labs, especially on the bigger ones, and everyone in between, like really trying to figure out how to use this technology, and that's how we kind of started building out something for the folks who may not be technical enough to code, but they really understand their business process really well. So how do we give them tools that can sort of even the odds against the bigger companies that are able to have specialized talent to adopt AI.
I know you guys went through YC program, and I'm curious to ask, what is your biggest takeaway from YC experience?
I think YC teaches you to be like extremely ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
So there's it's you are essentially surrounded by really amazing people, and that like really pushes you to perform more. And it's there's this like community of like your group that meets like every few weeks, and you tell each other about the progress that you made, and so that continual progress in like in a time pressured environment. I think we've tried to carry that forward. We our founding team meets every week. We try to consistently track some goals, and I think that's the biggest takeaway that I took from YC. Trying to like have that consistent review of like some sort of performance, and really try to compress the time in which you can achieve that with ambitious goals.
Makes sense. Now, thinking about the future, let's say 3 to 5 years, where do you see decisional AI? What is the North Star for the company?
I think it is about like evening the odds, like I said earlier. Our mission is to help businesses really adopt and integrate AI into their workflows in a practical way, uh, and I think we would have achieved that if like we could help businesses get 100% completion of like their workflows using our AI agents. And I think uh, if we could have done that for like millions of businesses, that would be where I would want to see Decisional.
Lastly, I know we've talked about the company, about the product, and future vision. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience as a final thought?
I would be interested to know like what they are trying to automate, or if they've used any of these tools, and like what pain points they faced. And I'd love to like have a conversation with anyone who would be interested in doing that.
Yeah, that's awesome. We can leave your contact details, and then
Yeah, for
people
sure.
can reach out and ask questions and tell their problems, and hopefully get the
Sounds good.
solutions. Well, Dhruv, thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.